They, again, we're going on 12 years. You see here 7 key recommendations. These, I think, are no longer controversial. We have distilled, we have discussed, and as I said before, we've seen these repeated in council resolution, we've seen them repeated in draft director's rule, we've seen them repeated in executive order. There is consensus. It's time to take action on these items. There is, I think, a lot of baggage associated with tree protection. There's perhaps fear around it. And I think we just need to take action and embrace that conflict and manage for it. You know, we can't ignore it and throw our hands up and say, oh, this is too difficult. We know that we have a limited amount of space in the city, and we know we need to manage for it. We do this well when it's something like right-of-way. We know we need a bike lane and a bus lane and a parking lane and street trees. And we don't just say, oh, there's no room for bike lanes, sorry, right? We embrace the conflict, we manage for it, we find trade-offs, and we make it work. We can be doing that with our private property as well. We can be doing that in a variety of ways to accommodate trees to grow our forest.
Weston, I think that's really well said. One of the points of, we need to be better managing our street trees as well. One of the points of conflict that I have noticed on private property is with people who are building new buildings on private property, there are not the incentives that we need to have them preserve the trees that are existing. I've seen some really great I don't like the aesthetics of townhomes. I do like the density that they provide. And the townhomes that have embraced retaining the trees on their lots make the lot feel as if it's always been there, because that tree is providing, as you say, value that is only additive every year that tree is alive. And so one of the things that I've noticed is really the need to allow for greater flexibility for people building buildings when trees are preserved, whether it's setback flexibility, height flexibility, floor area ratio flexibility. There's been too many times that our code has been too restrictive on people building buildings when they want to save these trees as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that those are some key points and really gets to the heart of what we're looking at, which is that we need to have more options, right? We need to have more ways in which we can get trees onto property, and we need to provide more incentives, more flexibility. Those are things that we provide for other common benefits, other common goods that we hope are provided in our developments. We should have those available for trees as well. And thank you for your point about preservation. Retaining a tree is always going to be more effective than starting from scratch.
Absolutely. There's a townhome complex on 20th and I want to say 61st in Ballard. They preserved the tree. They were able to build the building in an L shape around it, and it makes the building feel like it's always been there in a way that couldn't have been accomplished without preserving that tree. Whereas 2 blocks north of there on, I believe it was 63rd, 2 blocks north and 1 block west, 63rd and 22nd, they tore down they cut down all of the trees that were there, and it doesn't have that feeling as if people have always been there. So.
Yeah, softening the impact of development. We know development's going to take place. How do we make sure that it works for everybody? Trees are a big part of that.
Because people, we need to have more. There is an environmental reason for having people in a dense environment. We're preserving land in the foothills and the outskirts of town by having more people here. I think New York City has one of the better ratios of impact of people to land because they have people in a really dense situation. Now, again, I'm not arguing for Ballard to become New York City. What I am saying is that when we have people living in a dense environment, we're able to lessen our environmental impact. And there's a way to preserve trees with that. And I think, as we discussed just a second ago, providing greater flexibility for people building that density that we need to be able to create the density and preserve the trees.
Yeah, great point. And I think, bringing up peer cities is important here. It's not that we see strong tree protection ordinances in cities that don't have growth. It's in fact the contrary, right? The strong tree protection ordinances we see are associated with cities with strong growth. For instance, a city like Austin, one of the fastest growing cities in the country, has one of the strongest tree protection ordinances. Our peer cities, if you look at, say, a Portland or a Denver, have very strong tree protection ordinances. So this isn't something that needs to not be associated with growth. It's in fact something that we would want to pair with growth. Just like anything else, when we're considering externalities, where we're considering impacts, stakeholders, and benefits, we need to be looking at the broader picture when we have these kinds of large changes. Next slide, please. So this is kind of just getting at some of the ways that we, from our end, have been tackling this. We know staff is working on it to some extent, but just talking about the larger impact here, we've developed a one-pager to distill this pretty complex issue of an ordinance to something that's digestible for public audience. We've received a lot of public input, and I think these are things we want to continue on. We'll talk a bit about 2021. And just to drive home one last point on the tree protection ordinance, why this is needed. We don't have data. We can't make good policy for our trees and vegetation unless we have information to make policy. We don't know necessarily what activities are causing to the most tree loss. We don't know what activities lead to the most tree growth. We don't have data. We do know that we're losing our big trees, our most important trees, and we have a good sense that we are losing some canopy cover over time. We're headed the wrong direction from our goal. But generally, we don't really know how to address that because we don't have data. And the tree protection ordinance starts to give us data through tree tracking, through incorporating trees in development processes, through permitting. We permit things that are important. We incentivize things that are important. Those are the activities that we use to govern important things. And trees have far more positive benefits and externalities than a back porch or a roof slope or all the other things that we permit and regulate. So we should be permitting and regulating the things that actually benefit our neighbors, actually benefit broader community. That's where the incentives need to be. And I was going to one more point. We need a process that has clear rules, right? We want our trees to be things that we know what we're supposed to do, and we know how to handle it, and we know how to get the most benefits. Right now, far too much of our tree issues are handled with the city attorney involved, right? We need to be able to have rules, have everyone decide what we're going to do, have developers know exactly what they're supposed to do, understand the rules, and abide by them. And we want to provide a clear and logical process.
I was just going to add on to your point about code regulation and permitting, which is, we just passed the strongest energy code in the nation a few weeks ago. And something that comes front of mind, I'm just going to keep focusing on this townhome and tree situation, where townhomes or buildings, any building that has a mature canopy over and or around it is going to use fewer resources to heat and cool the property. I guess I'm just kind of adding on, I'm riffing off of your comments that we have these codes that determine how we use our energy, and we could be using less energy with canopy cover.
Exactly. Yeah, we know that our drainage rate incorporates impervious cover for our private lots. We could be leaning much further into that in terms of getting efficient resource use and incentivizing trees and vegetation.
And I see on this slide you have a picture of a tree bag, which helps a tree in its first years of life make sure that it makes it on. One thing that a District 6 resident who met with me during District 6 office hours that I hold every week, Sandy from Green Lake, takes it upon herself to go to the neighbors of new townhomes that have just moved in to educate them on how to make sure that their tree grows and thrives. I think that she has really keyed into a gap that we have, that when people are purchasing townhomes, it may be their first home, and maybe they have never had the opportunity to care for a tree in their yard. And there are just, if you don't know that you have to water the tree, then you might not water it. And that could be the difference between success and failure in this situation. I know that we, through a budget action in last fall's budget session, produced a statement of legislative intent to identify ways that we can expand the tree ambassador program. And so maybe not now, but we would love your input on how we could expand that tree ambassador program to allow everyday people to have more tools to care for the trees in their neighborhood.
Excellent. Yeah, it's a tremendous program, and as you point out, kind of a key component of the stewardship and management of the urban forest. And thank you for your anecdote. We have a tremendous group of tree advocates, passionate, who are deeply engaged, and I think it's part of our mission to expand our community, to bring in voices that haven't been part of the conversation, and that means not only perhaps BIPOC community that isn't well represented within the tree advocate community, but also perhaps business interests, development interests, and those who are huge stakeholders when it comes to our forest, but often aren't at the table for the conversations. With that, I'm gonna pass over to Sarah to kind of talk a bit more about other items we were looking at last year.
Thank you, Weston. What is shown on the slide are some of the key conversations we were a part of with the different either city department or different letters that we sent out for in support. So for Safe Routes to School, for SDOT's program, one thing was that they really highlighted how they're utilizing trees to provide a better walking environment for the students, and then also using the trees to help reduce vehicular speeds on the adjacent roadways. So that was great to hear that they are using the trees to be able to meet their goals for providing safe routes to school. For the SPU's Ship Canal Water Quality Project, one of the big things was there were tree removals as part of the project, and with the city's 2-for-1 replacement, one of the challenges was finding where to place the replacement trees or plant the replacement trees. And so I was working with the SPU on looking at trying to keep the tree replantings in the neighborhood they are removed from, and if they can't, where to prioritize replanting the trees. For the navigation team, the presentation was in early of the year, and really we were setting up to discuss the multi-departmental rules, but due to COVID, that went out the window, and so really it was the conversation was mostly about how they really needed to pivot to address the COVID crisis. And one of the big takeaways, though, was it from that we were wanting to be part of the conversation is we are seeing how encampments often in our treed areas is starting to add a more negative connotation for treed areas in Seattle. And so we're wanting to make sure we understand the public opinion and also the challenges of trying to house our unhoused population, and make sure that we can find a way to help prioritize the efforts to protect the investment of our urban forests. For the Green New Deal, again, they were beginning to staff the positions, but due to COVID, had to really it was a big challenge to continue that work. But we're very excited about the possibilities of the Green New Deal in helping us be better stewards for our urban forest, and what kind of job creation this can bring to the city. With the Black Lives Matter statement of support, I want to just acknowledge that the canopy cover within our communities of our BIPOC communities is a lot lower than other neighborhoods, and so we see the inequities within our built environment and want to try to make sure, as a part of the city, as Weston said, we are acknowledging that and working on how to remove address the racism that has been kind of institutionalized through our processes. SDOT's pest readiness, one of the big things that came out from this briefing was that they haven't yet really been able to get SDCI on board at the time of the briefing, which was in September, so things might have changed. But with over 70% of the tree canopy on private property, the Urban Forest Commission felt that it was very important to get SDCI on board to be able to address any threat we have of pests coming into the community, into our city. Another thing with this is also part of their SDOT's kind of self-evaluation was they acknowledged they don't have information. They, again, to Weston's point, we need to know what we have in order to manage it. And we are looking to the ordinance changes to help fill in some of these gaps. And just wanted to highlight another place where we're seeing this lack of information impacting the ability of the city to meet these goals.
Jumping in, when you say pests, we're not talking about rodents and mice. We're talking about the tree ash beetle and
yes. We're talking about, yes, that is correct. We're not talking about the more what you think about is like the rats and everything in our city, but more the threats to the urban forest, where I can't remember how many years ago. Sorry, I apologize. I'm the hydrologist, so I might be not using the right terms. But as far as bringing in the different diseases and different bugs that will wipe out set species, and one of the things is we have a ton of maple trees, and if there's a threat to maple trees, we could easily lose a lot of our urban forests. And so trying to understand how much of what type of urban forest we have is very important to understand how we need to respond. And again, this is being it's a multi-departmental team, but one of the gaps was including getting SDCI kind of more integrated, and we're concerned because so much of the urban forest canopy is within our on private property.
If I may add a little bit,
please.
Thank you. So SOT is actually the lead for the city, but this is a regional effort, and Seattle Parks and Recreation, Seattle Public Utilities, other urban forestry departments are very much involved. I also wanted to just point out that this kind of issue is another one of the kind of fallouts of climate change, where we're having a drier and hotter summers, which tend to place an impact on the health of the trees. And when they are kind of weakened by ongoing drought, then it's easier that they are invaded and succumb to pests like the emerald ash borer. ESDOT has done a great job with the street tree inventory, and they have a great accounting of how many of the street trees are ashes and how many are kind of like potentially going to be lost once the emerald ash borer gets here. So all of this planning, again, is regional, and the city is part of that regional effort, and ESDOT is leading that.
Thank you, Sandra. I guess I'll do a real quick point. I'm seeing we're getting closer to time for the Urban Forest Management Plan update. One of the things that in the draft we commented on was a lot of the narrative of tree versus development versus, densification. And so trying to break that narrative up, and similar, like South Lake Union has gone through a ton of development, has gone through a ton of densification, and its tree canopy has been increased. So one of the things is just trying to break down that narrative to be more specific and define the terms that we really want to acknowledge are creating the friction of preserving our trees. Next slide, please.
And if I may, just really quickly, I just would like to respond to what I heard in public comment. Just wanted to clarify that as part of the work that the Urban Forestry team has done, we have included, and I'm speaking now as part of the Urban Forestry core team, we included the Urban Forestry Commission in key ways. In 2018, when we were just getting going with the plan update, we held a listening session in July to make sure that we understood the Commission's vision for the plan update. Then we held two different deliberative sessions to be able to share with the Commission. One was in March, and the other one in August of 2019, where we shared with this smaller subcommittee of the Commission the initial assessment that we had done, the inclusive engagement plan, and kind of like the findings of that important work. We shared a potential plan structure as well as initial goals to be discussed and for the Commission to have the opportunity to weigh in. Then we also shared later in 2019 the progress that we were achieving, specific actions, performance indicators, all of these to be able to inform the work that the team was doing to update the plan. And then in 2020, we kicked off the public comment period with a briefing in detail to the Urban Forestry Commission in October. So I just wanted to say, because I feel that finding creative ways to engage the Commission without having to have a big, elaborate public meetings, but really get their key experience in all of the skills that they bring to the table. That's why we've been having these deliberative sessions. And for sure, I personally don't believe that we are considering the Commission just another member of the public.
Well
Thank
said.
you. Thanks, Sandra. I want to just, with interest in time, highlight the Forest Health Watch project and IC Tree. Those two organizations are utilizing or are using web platforms to engage youth and public in research and in education, and we found that very encouraging to try to instill the appreciation for our urban forest and nature in the community. Next slide. For our internal operations, we again just want to highlight that one of the things we were doing by reevaluating our bylaws, different protocols, was to make sure we strict out any restrictive language. We and with regard to eliminating gendered pronouns. And then also we wanted to make sure that in the prompts to both presenters and ourselves, we took a moment to make sure that we looked at different conversations through the race and social justice lens, so that we build that into our our bi-monthly meetings and all the different coordination we have with the partners. And that also tied into our annual meeting between the Urban Forestry Commission and the IDT team, where we were looking at training. We participated in training on racial equity and the urban forest, and that also went into how to reevaluate how we are providing material to the public and making sure that it is as accessible as possible. Thank you. And that'll be back. Next slide. Yep. Back to Weston.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, just to wrap up here real quick, and then I'd love it if there's time for a question or two. Looking towards this year, and these are things I think you've generally heard about: the Urban Forest Management Plan update, obviously tree regulations. The one we haven't talked about yet is the SLI issued last year, and I think is supposed to be due back to you all in September. And this is focused on restructuring urban forestry management within the city. Obviously a very big issue. As you know, currently 9 departments work on trees and vegetation in the city. And an auditor report almost a decade ago showed that perhaps there's some efficiencies in management that we could be capitalizing on if things were restructured. And a lot of this is tied up in the ordinance and issues of protection and regulation, and how do we most effectively get to those. We're looking at removing any potential conflicts of interest. And so engaging with staff on the SLI is a big part of our upcoming year. And in fact, the commission is called out specifically in the SLI to be a co-creator of recommendations. So I'll go ahead and I guess leave it there and open it up to see if any of you all have questions, comments, anything else for us.
Great, thank you, Weston. Thank you, Sarah and Sandra. Colleagues, questions? I see Councilmember Peterson with your screen on and your Save the Trees. I've got mine right here too. Welcome. Take it away, Councilmember Peterson.
Thank you, Chair Strauss. And I just want to thank everybody on the Urban Forestry Commission for their work. One of my staff members attends most of your meetings, and we did look at this work plan, and we're happy to see the scope of it. Obviously, we'd love to see things achieved even earlier. We know our executive departments are under a lot of strain from the COVID pandemic and other things they're doing, and so we'll just continue to work with the commission and appreciate your sage advice and expertise in these areas. Thank you.
Of course, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Peterson. Colleagues, any other questions? I guess I'll just wrap up by saying this last picture that you show is illustrative of the importance of protecting both street trees and providing those opportunities to protect the trees on private property. Not knowing the zoning or where this photo was taken, if the zoning allowed for it, we could have a more dense neighborhood in this photograph and protect trees. And so, again, density it helps protect the environment and address climate crisis as well as trees.
Thank you all again for having us. As always, feel free to utilize us as a resource. We're here to serve you all. Let's get tree protections passed.